Welcome to Qualified Opinions, where we test the ideas and limits, the knowns and known unknowns around freedom and order in contemporary politics and society. We invite you to listen as we engage with leading and emerging thinkers across disciplines and issues who will sharpen our thinking on the topics shaping our discourse.
Greetings. I am excited to talk to my friend Matt Mayer. He's the president now of Opportunity Ohio, but he used to work in the Bush administration. He was I used to call him the Homeland Security grants czar, and he's worked in all sorts of capacity. And I'm just, we've been friends for just too long to count. No. So I'm just really excited about this. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So before we start, I actually want to tell listeners how we met. We were not friends at all. In fact, we were
No,
battling against
we
each
were.
other back in 2003, 4. So you were the head of whatever it was called, the grants office for Homeland
ODP,
Security.
Office for
Yeah.
Domestic Preparedness back then.
And I was being a pest because I was looking at the allocation of these Homeland Security grants. And I thought, it wasn't going in the places where basically it was going to the regular places. Like it was always there's always government tends to follow a formula, and that formula is not necessarily the one that is end up targeting the place where it should go, and you would get the biggest bang for the buck. And you were battling me. We exchanged op-eds, and we were not friends, but I always liked you. And then I can't even remember how in the end we had a bunch of conversation. I was like, this guy is great. And we became friends.
Well, thank you. We did. And I think you liked me because I essentially started pushing to get the grants done in the kind of common sense way that you had wanted, right? Which was
Yes.
to target using
Yes.
risk and vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
consequences. So instead of doing kind of formulaic population-based
Yes.
nothingness, we were saying, wait, where's the risk?
Yes.
And if we put this money here, can we ameliorate, these vulnerabilities and these consequences? And we were successful at that for, unfortunately, just 1 year because we got that done for the '05 grant cycle. I did a huge press conference
Yeah.
with Michael Chertoff, if you
Yeah.
remember.
I remember
And
that.
then we reduced the number of urban areas getting money when we made them all justify it based upon risk and vulnerability. And then the year after I left, it all fell apart because they went back to the bureaucratic, everybody wanted to spread the money everywhere kind of thing.
But I will say that, I mean, I liked you not just because you ended up doing what I thought, what I liked, because I remember having, I had this mindset where like, if you work for the government, it's got to be that there's something wrong with you. And it was kind of like I wasn't kind of quite, I don't know, like generous enough. And I remember having a conversation. Actually, you invited me to come to your office. And I remember having a conversation and leaving and thinking, this guy's really free market. And
Oh,
I
very, very much so.
and
Yeah. I
and
mean,
I was just and I was thinking, okay, okay, okay. So this is kind of it was, but I also remember I think of you so often because one of the things that you corrected me on, I had used in an op-ed as evidence of where the money was going, and also the fact that as a result, it was misused by the communities getting the grant. I remember talking about the garbage truck that the Homeland Security grants were used to pay for garbage trucks. Do you remember that? Air
I do.
conditioning, garbage
Yep.
truck. And I was
Yep.
like, isn't this like really this is improving Homeland Security, blah, blah, blah. And I remember you responded in an op-ed saying, yes, actually, during 9/11, this I can't remember which community, whether it was in New Jersey or New York or somewhere, like actually used their garbage truck to just
Remove the debris of
remove
9/11.
the debris.
Yeah.
And and
It wore out their garbage
and it
trucks.
wrote, and I remember thinking, like I remember, like I just obviously thinking, well, okay, I'm wrong on me. I'll never use this example again. And telling you that I
I'm
was,
glad we're recording this because I'm sure those words rarely come out of your mouth.
no, but I mean, no, but you know what? It is actually, is had a real big impact on me because when we look from the outside at the way government is spending the money, right? Often we grab on to things that look like they're outrageous, and often it is. And often we also don't know enough about why the like, let me give you an example. And something that I've heard said many times, and I probably have used it in some of my op-eds back in the days, is, you remember, it's the toilet. The Department of Defense spent, like, I can't remember what it was, like it was like $10,000 on a toilet, right? And I remember, after you mentioned this to me about the garbage trucks, reading that actually there's a big reason why. First, this is not all the toilet. It's the one in the jet, because they actually require some sort of, like, bolting or whatever. Like, they need, because these are like the jet that goes super fast, whatever. Like, it's, and I remember thinking, now, it doesn't mean that this toilet provided by, like, by good kind of decision making could not be provided at a lower price. There were, like,
Correct.
prevailing wages and all this,
Yeah.
but it's not always as outrageous as you think it is. And
Well, this is why, in our business, right, you've got to be real careful to try to drive policy through by an anecdote, because
yes,
sometimes the anecdote
yes,
isn't what you think it is, right? And uh, we're kind of seeing that right now with this whole Somali immigrant fleecing of Medicaid with the home health care thing, and
yeah,
we're seeing it in Ohio. And, one of the things that's interesting about that is people are like, "Oh, it's fraud, it's fraud." And it actually might not be fraud. It just may be stupid government policy,
yes,
because if the government allowed this to happen and didn't have the system in place to make sure everything was happening, then it's just people going, "Well, if the government's going to provide this benefit, why not take it and get it?"
yeah.
And so it's not fraud, but we get caught up in the fraud anecdote when it may just be dumb public policy we need to change,
Well,
right?
yeah. In fact, you wrote a really great post about this. So you do a lot of work in Ohio. Would you say this is
Yeah.
your main focus? Even though you
Main focus now, yeah,
now
is
your
is,
main
is free
focus is
market stuff in
is
Ohio.
free market stuff in Ohio, and you wrote a piece recently about Medicaid, and you were targeting Vivek Ramaswamy, who is running for governor of Ohio, and is promising, to clean up the Medicaid spending and all of this, and you point out two things that I think are incredibly important. First, the explosion in Medicaid spending in Ohio
Yeah.
is actually has been done under the watch of Republican
All
governors, and
Republicans, all
they were
supermajority
all
legislature,
Republicans.
and John Kasich and Mike
Yeah,
DeWine, both Republican governors. For 15 years, we've doubled by 100% Medicaid spending
yeah.
in Ohio.
And so that alone, right? What it means is, first, it means Republicans are not the free, or they're certainly, not free market anymore now, or even pretending that they are. But though they were pretending back in the days, they weren't. They were like, let's say, in the way they were doing this. But the other thing that is important is like, if you have a government program that is extremely big, you shouldn't be surprised if there's enormous amount of spending. You shouldn't be surprised that the oversight of it is just really hard. And the other point that I think is essential in the post that you have, and I want you to kind of actually elaborate on this, is that you talk about that what we call fraud. Often it's not fraud, it's just eligibility rules that we're against. They've expanded eligibility so much that this is what drives the explosion in spending. And when we look at it and we're like, this is totally ridiculous, we're pointing at something that is not illegal. That is literally, and the
Yeah, we've
problem,
made we've made fleecing taxpayers legal, essentially,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And Medicaid's a great example for me because there's so many things that it covers that drive me crazy. Like, so number one, right? So Vivek's post about we're going to root out fraud, and it's like, okay, great.
Hmm.
And so, what are you going to do though about expanding Medicaid under Obamacare that John Kasich did? And all these
Yeah.
Republicans have kept doing, and they've expanded it more. They've increased eligibility. They've broadened what's covered, all the things that have led to where we are today. And that's why Medicaid spending has gone up over 9% per year in Ohio
Yeah.
since John Kasich, right? 2011 or 2013 when they expanded it. Number one. Number two, it now swallows 52% of our state budget. So this is because remember,
Yeah.
Veronique,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is all the whole, well, it's, expanded Medicaid, the feds are covering 90%,
Well,
meaning the national taxpayer, the deficit is covering
yeah.
90%,
Yeah.
right? But as I say in my piece, hey guys, last I checked, when it was essentially 18 billion in Ohio, it's now 36 billion. 10% of 18 is, what,
Yeah.
1.8
Yeah. Yeah.
billion? Well, 10% of 36 is
Well,
3.6.
yeah.
So,
And
right,
also,
our spending's even though our 10% is still 10%, it's a huge amount of money now that's swallowing other priorities, driving it in its. As I say to Vivek, because he wants to get rid of, adopted my idea to get rid of the state income tax. Well, the problem is that's $9 billion. You've got to figure out where to find
yeah.
it. So either you're going to raise the sales tax to like 10, 13%, which is not good, or you got to get rid of expanded Medicaid to over the course of about a decade, right? As you pull down that money then allows you to start getting rid of the state income tax. But, he just wants to do the fraud stuff because that's popular. It's a great soundbite, but he doesn't want to do the tough stuff, which is repeal Medicaid
Well, but
expansion.
the other thing is like when people, it drives me nuts. And you say this in your post. You said, and people say, well, we only pay 10%, but we we are, for instance, I'm in Virginia, but I'm also a federal taxpayer. I'm also when the federal government can't is gonna go bust, like the as a Virginian, we're not going to be like, oh, you know what? It doesn't affect us because we're like, there's not like it's like, I don't never understand that argument. When the
Well,
federal government is
and
your biggest tax bill, when the biggest debt that's going to kind of blow in your face is federal, when that 90% of spending, right? It's like, it affects you. So this
yeah,
notion that,
and I don't know what the right term is from an economic standpoint. You will tell me. I'll call it just like rent seeking. What that federal policy also does is it says to states like Illinois, California, hey guys, we're only covering 10%. So let's do Medicaid from instead of 130% of poverty, let's do 150. Hey, instead of 150 for citizens, let's expand it to illegal somehow or people who have driver's license, all the loopholes. So what ends up happening is, places that have common sense policies, maybe Ohio, maybe Virginia, we
yeah,
taxpayers end up subsidizing California's gold-plated system it's just like as what's happening in Europe with defense. We
yeah, yeah,
subsidize for
yeah,
them to essentially send all their money to welfare, and then they say, you guys need to do national healthcare like we do. Well, we're spending all our money on defending you guys, right? Well, it's the same thing with this in domestically.
yeah.
We are spending all this money nationally going into massive true debt and deficits because we created federal policies that incentivize states to essentially rob other states by their policies that export costs to the national taxpayer, right?
Yeah. But
So I don't know if that's rent
yeah, yeah.
sinking. I don't know what the right
I
term
mean,
of that is.
it's just basically shifting the burden
Yeah.
to but
But so
again, national, taxpayers or national whatever, it is still us
yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're both national and
Yeah.
Virginians and all people
And
like,
so the other thing with Medicaid that it illustrates to me very vibrantly, right? And this is where Ohio is. I get so frustrated, whether it's the Heritage Foundation, it's, Steve Moore in Art Laffer out in Tennessee, whatever it is they do, or it's Fox News, you know, nobody is I feel like I'm always in this forest cutting down these trees that nobody's hearing
yeah,
because nobody at the national level, whether it's conservative media, conservative think tanks, whatever, is jumping in to say, Matt's right. Why is Vivek saying he's going to have to fix all these things in Ohio after we've had 15 straight years of Republican governors and a supermajority Republican legislature? Why hasn't this stuff gotten done already? And Ohio is looking more like Florida, Tennessee, Texas, and less like Illinois. Veronique, our spending under Mike DeWine, Republican governor with the supermajority Republican legislature, has gone up at the same percentage pace as Illinois
yeah,
in the same period of time.
yeah,
And you want to call us Republican, conservative, red,
yeah.
fiscal conservative, and we're spending money at the same pace as Illinois, which is, as you know, progressive left, throw money everywhere.
But I totally agree with you. But I want to go back to this question of eligibility because
Yeah.
basically what you're saying and what this is something Todd DeHaven and I were, he's at Cato, but we worked together for many years. We've been saying when people were complaining about SNAP spending increase and people were like, oh, fraud, 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 fraud. We were saying it's not fraud. It's eligibility standards.
Eligibility.
Standards have, or like Social Security's disability insurance. Same thing. It exploded. It's exploded. Why? Of not because of the fraud. It's exploded because you've changed eligibility standards to actually make people eligible for Social Security disability insurance for things that you can't really verify, back pain, mental health. And I'm not saying that everyone who claims to have a back pain or everyone who claims to have mental health doesn't actually have it. But the truth of the matter is that it's exploded, and these are things that you can't really police, right? And
Well,
so,
no, and in
and
fact, as you know, one political party that their whole goal is to increase that dependency by doing just that, by creating
no,
more and more people being dependent upon government programs and money and services, right? The thing that's so shocking to people like me is that states like Ohio that are red, that are supposed to be fiscally conservative, are just as bad as expanding that eligibility,
yeah,
expanding those definitions to get even more people involved. And so then when we say, oh, look at all these immigrants that are taking advantage of this program. It's fraud. And this is why, as you know, for
yeah, yeah,
years, every conservative goes, we're going to get waste, fraud, and abuse out of the system. And it amounts to nothing. Even that's why Doge has been a complete failure in many ways,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it's not so much fraud is if they're eligible, you're gonna begrudge them from going after it. I mean, just like government workers who retire at 55 with those full pensions makes me mad as hell. But if you and I were them, we would do the same thing
Yep.
because we've made a system that says, "Oh, hell yeah, fleece it if you can." And so we've got to get control of the fleecing, but nobody wants to do that because it's not politically popular from a voting
And
standpoint.
it's like, and what you were saying in your tweet to Ramaswamy or in your post is actually have the courage to say, it's not fraud. It's actually we need to just change the eligibility standards.
Correct.
And the thing is, like, I remember when we were working on the SSDI and SNAP with TAD, the explosion were under Bush, under President Bush. They loosened like crazy, and it got blame on Obama, which of course doubled down, but it really started under Bush, like loosening and expanding eligibility for these programs. And that's how it grows. It's not the fraud, of course, we need to get rid of, but actually, if you want to get control over those programs, you gonna have to have the courage to actually review eligibility standards and narrow them. But that you said something else that I find shocking. I actually kind of missed this. I don't know if you said this in your post. Um, 52% of the Ohio budget is actually Medicaid.
Medicaid, yeah, it swallows 52% of the state budget
It's like
at this point now.
it's
So
crazy.
so that means if you look at Ohio's budget and go, "Oh, okay, it's like $46 billion." More than half of that is Medicaid. And so that means A, hard to cut taxes more than we do already, crowds out other things that might be important. Because yeah, and again, if you want to, and what I say is we have functionally then said we're going to outsource our Ohio state budget to the federal government bureaucrats on Medicaid because because
Yeah,
we don't control policy. We have to go to them and say, Mother, may I have this eligibility? Mother, may I have a waiver? Can we have a
yeah,
work requirement? And if they say no, too bad. So we've essentially said to Ohio citizens, because of the Medicaid expansion and whatnot, we're going to essentially put control of Ohio's budget and your taxes into the hands of bureaucrats in Washington, which is nuts to me, right?
it's nuts.
And this is why I argue, and I said this to Vivek, why would you not become, and this is what I put, it was one of my core platforms when I was exploring run for governor in
Mhm.
2023, right? Was why would Ohio not want to be the voice nationally to say we need to decentralize all of Medicaid,
Yeah,
100% of funding and policy, so that every state, the 50 laboratories of competition, can all do what they want to do. And if California wants to have gold plated Medicaid for illegals, let them. So Californians have to pay for it. If Ohio wants to do common sense, we'll do that. Right. In that way, the 50 laboratories of competitions can see what works, what doesn't. We've done it before. It works. We know federalism works. But instead, nobody, where is that voice? And this is where Vivek, are you just going to do status quo stuff? Because you're supposed to be like the guy that's going to be kind
yeah,
of the rapture, and you're not. You're just babble, 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 the same conservative pablum that we hear from everybody that doesn't result in any changes.
So it's interesting also. So Jack Saman, who's my colleague here at Mercatus, we've talked with some representatives in Utah, including Representative Ken Ivory. And one of the things that we've been talking about is that states need to prepare for the looming debt crisis that's coming at the federal level. So there's this sense, right, that it's okay, to expand Medicaid because the federal government is going to pick up 90% of the bill. But the truth of the matter is that actually the federal government doesn't have an expanding bandwidth. We've already went through a debt crisis, which most people don't realize we did, when inflation has been the highest inflation in 40 years. That's effectively, and it's investors saying, you know what? We actually just don't believe that there's a fiscal backing for all of that debt, and they reprice the debt and inflation rises. That is a debt crisis. So when people say, oh, it's weird, I wasn't like, I've always thought that with that level of debt, we already had a debt crisis. I'm like, we already had a
Yeah,
debt
what are we at?
crisis.
40 trillion in
Yeah,
national debt,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
And
what
like
was it a third of all annual federal spending is deficit spending?
yes,
A third of it every year we do a budget. A third of that is deficit. We're just piling onto the debt because we don't actually have enough money to pay for all these obligations that we've made federally. So why would we
so
keep
the
doing
the
this?
public debt is like a little under 32 trillion, but if you take the overall debt of the federal government, it's close to 40
Yeah,
trillion,
nuts.
and
Nuts
it's
amount.
crossed over
And we just
100%
hit
of
what?
debt.
We just 100% of GDP
Yeah,
2 weeks ago. So we're now back to World War II spending,
with
GDP
no
spending.
decline in sight. Right.
Correct.
So we've told these guys is, and they actually came to us because they had a sense that they needed to do something to protect the states who were willing against that looming crisis. And they're trying to think about what is it that states do when the federal government inevitably faces this debt crisis, whether it's inflation is not, if it is inflation due to the federal debt, it is going to affect everyone in Virginia, Ohio, Colorado, everywhere. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
not, there's no like a federal grocery stores, right? I mean, it's like inflation is hitting everyone. We just went through, everyone should remember it could be much worse. So what is it that states need to do? Because when that happens, right, depending on they're going to start, eventually they're going to have to start cutting. I mean, very likely they're going to go and is going to affect the states. Whatever they do, it's considering how much state budgets depend on federal spending. It is going to affect the states. So what is it you need to do? And considering the share of state budget that are consumed by Medicaid, it seems kind of like a no-brainer that this is where you start to protect yourself against the federal crisis that is.
Yeah, then that's exactly right. I mean, I think, and this is where the states that did not expand Medicaid under Obamacare are in a better position, right? Because they don't have now this dependency for that 90% hook that came with
Yeah.
Obamacare. But I would say again, where are the group of governors that are going to lead this national fight to say, let's just decentralize this. Let's decentralize transportation money. Like, we've built a highway system. Why does the federal government need to be involved anymore? How about we just decentralize the money and all the power to the states, and each state takes care of its own
But
system?
look
Why do we
look to
need
those Utah guys because
this?
they want to actually create a compact of states. So the drive is a little different in the sense that they want to actually kind of again protect themselves against the federal crisis. But
Yeah.
effectively it does the same. And so they're driving an effort, a federalism effort to try to say, okay, well, like who are the states that are vulnerable? Who are the states that are and apparently like Ohio is in a really bad position, which is kind of crazy considering that it's been under Republican leadership at least at the very least at the governor level for
No, no. So the General Assembly's been supermajority for 15 years.
15 years. Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. They have all the power they need to do whatever they want. And look, our job growth is so since Trump got reelected, Ohio has added 17,500 jobs in 14 months. for a state of 11.8 million people. Terrible job growth.
Yeah.
We're losing population to other states.
Yeah.
Over half of our 88 counties have lost jobs and people in the last 20 years. Our education rankings have gone from here to here. So we're dropping it in terms of education rankings. And so you look at that and you say, this is a red state? Where is we're pro-union, not right to work, which kills us. We still have an income tax, which I had put out a plan over 15 years ago on how to get rid of it. They ignored it. So we could be one of those states. So what
And
are this, 9
unfortunately,
states without a state income tax?
with the increasing of the SALT, state and local tax
Right.
deduction, they're not going to want to, because the cost of having an income tax has actually gone down, right?
Yeah, but the issue is really going to be the overall the overall attractiveness to corporations,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
They
yeah.
see that mentality and say, oh, we're pro-union, we don't get rid of our taxes.
Yeah, yeah.
Our local tax burden's pretty damn high. So all of that goes, oh, I wonder why corporations aren't coming to Ohio. They're going to Tennessee, Texas, Florida, Utah, Idaho. And that's, oh, we're a cold weather state. That's the thing I hear all the time. Oh, well, we can't do what Florida, Texas do because we're cold weather. I go, great. Look at Colorado, Utah, and Idaho. Just as cold weather, and they're crushing it in terms of job growth, population
Yeah.
growth, right? All those types of
So
things.
you think, I know you think that right to work is is a super important factor. What are the so I mean, if you want to explain your thinking on right to work.
Well, look, if you look at the numbers on the 50 states, right? Then you look at right to work versus forced unionization. Since 1990, so longitudinal, right? This
Hmm.
is lots of data
Hmm.
now. The forced unionization states are at about 33% net average growth in that 36 years now. Long time, right? Ohio, we're worse. We're only at 19%. Since 1990, that's our net job growth. Right to work states, on average, 77%, doubling the job growth. Why does that matter? You know this, right?
Hmm.
If there are more job opportunities, there's more competition for workers, wages, benefits go up, right? It shows a booming economy. And so the problem, though, right? And I've written about this too, right? Nobody wants to talk about the downside of Donald Trump's embrace, and now JD Vance too, of big labor. It has frozen now. So states like Ohio, we're screwed. I call us a dead state walking because we can now not do right to work. Because if we do, those blue collar Trump Republicans
Hmm.
are just going to flip back to being Democrats because, right, they're so
Yeah, yeah.
indoctrinated from essentially Northwest Ohio along the Ohio River down towards Cincinnati. That whole formerly blue Obama voter is now a Trump voter. They won't tolerate it. So states like Ohio, while are just stuck, while we're surrounded by right to work Indiana, right to work Kentucky, right to work West Virginia. So we're really like the far left bastion of the pro-union states that run from Ohio all the way to Maine, where you see the weakest job growth. People are fleeing, and that's us. Like and then you just tag in Illinois and you're good to go. But it's pretty bad. And even if you look at the recovery since the pandemic, so every state faced the same headwinds and dealt with it. Again, right to work states, their job growth since the pandemic far outstrips forced unionization states. We're ranked 36th or 39th. We're the 39th slowest recovering state. 6 years, 5 years later. Because again, we don't have the right policies. And Vivek's not doing anything to talk about that. It's all this pabulum, conservative rhetoric, the red meat we throw out, politicians always throw out, that then when they get in office, they go, oh, well, I'm not going to do the tough stuff. Why would I do the tough stuff? That'll cost political capital, and I'm not using my political capital on that because he's got his eye at Washington, right? We know he wants to be president. So that's all he really focuses on, big picture, which is why he creates these stupid cultural fights on creedal Americans versus heritage Americans, blah, blah, blah,
Well,
right?
you would think that actually kind of fixing Ohio and launching Ohio on a on just basically like rather than like not just simply slowing down the deterioration, but actually kind of
Yeah, become the
launching
Ron
it.
DeSantis of Ohio is a
Yeah,
great launching
yeah.
pad for the presidency.
You would think that
Yeah.
it's like, and look, there are places where like if you look at a town like Pittsburgh, right? I mean, there's no reason why Ohio couldn't actually be a hub for innovation and attract, this type of work, energy, and production. But it is not going to if you don't change anything. I mean, just
No, it's not. And again, one of the things I argue, and this is, you may not like this, but and I refer to it as Matt Mayer International Airport, which is we have 3 airports, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, that are kind of considered bigger airports, and they're garbage. 48th, 50th, and 51st busiest
Yeah, I saw
airports. Seventh largest.
you wanted to do some industrial policy for airport when I want to privatize them all.
Well, I know, but listen, right? So we're the 7th largest state. Columbus is the 15th largest city. But if you fly out of Port Columbus, John Glenn international, because we have one flight a day to Toronto. That's the only way we get
Yeah, yeah.
international. Okay. You usually have to fly somewhere to get to where you're going. No business is going to come here with that kind of infrastructure, air infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
We've lost like Chiquita Brands, NCR fled to Atlanta and Charlotte because of the air infrastructure. So what we've done is I say, look what happened in Denver. They built Denver International Airport, and it created an economic boom in the greater Denver area because, right, it's become a hub of United. Stapleton was landlocked. They couldn't do anything with it. We are that same story. Port Columbus is landlocked in Columbus. And if you were to shift it just down to Rickenbacker, which is now just kind of more of a cargo hub,
Mhm.
and where Anduril is building their Arsenal One kind of project, if they shifted the airport down there, instead of spending $2 billion, which we're currently doing to build a second terminal when we don't even have all the gates filled for our first terminal. So it's like,
Yeah.
if you build it, they will come crap.
Yeah.
Let's build a world-class airport down in Rickenbacker. Talk to the Uniteds, the Southwest, and the Americans up in Chicago who are dealing with the lake effect and all the delays and cancellations that come out of that place. Get them to come down to Columbus, where they'll make more money. Customers will be happy. That create an incentive because we now have the air infrastructure. We can get most places on one hop. That matters to people. But again, nobody wants to do the tough stuff to kind of get Ohio
Well,
really
but
positioned for the future.
I mean, so the problem I have with that argument is is that it's not going to deliver if the underlying environment in Ohio is not also conducive to
I totally
business.
agree.
So
I totally agree.
I mean, you have to. So the way I think about infrastructure is like actually literally they're the supporting actor to economic growth. If you have economic growth in Ohio because you change the policies, because you change the environment, because you reform the tax system, the corporate tax system, you reform you deregulate, you do all of that stuff. The next step will be for private investment to actually say this is where we actually we need the right infrastructure, and that right infrastructure is probably going to be an airport that actually can take you,
Yeah, no,
everywhere.
you and I are in violent agreement, right? But what I'm saying is that the Matt Mayer International Airport, it's the mentality that comes with that, right? Which is, hell yeah, we're going to get rid of the estate income tax, we're going to get rid of Medicaid expansion, right? We're going to fight property tax growth
Yeah,
going forward, And we have this thing called Jobs Ohio, which is a gross failure,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they've been in existence now. They spend all this billions of dollars, and we get one of the weakest job growths our
Yeah.
job growth since they were founded has gone like this. And my point is, let's use their money, get rid of them, and let's use the money to fund the airport. So that way, as we're getting rid of the state income tax, as we're controlling property growth, as we're going to push right to work, we then at the same time are going to build this thing that corporations say, oh, this guy's got energy. This guy's doing stuff. That state's going places. They're really doing things that are going to make that place great. Now, and we're within 500 miles of half the U.S. population. It creates a huge mentality change. But right now, we're just going to go like, oh, we're going to do
No,
nothing. We're going to
in
status
fact,
quo
Job
and expect
Ohio.
change.
I want you to
What's that?
explain. I want you to explain to people what Job Ohio is. But before you start, I'm going to say that there's only the sign that it's actually a, a state in decline is that they even need to have the Job Ohio
I
program.
totally agree. Yeah.
So
So Jobs Ohio was created by John Kasich, yet another John Kasich disaster. And what they did is they essentially gave them the liquor, so Ohio's liquor sales every year in exchange for this money now 15 years ago. Okay. And so, it's like this quasi private thing. So there's no transparency. There's no accountability. Like we can't audit them. We can't see what they do because they say it's trade secret and it's protected. So they're not subject to open records. And so they spend all this money and then they just say, trust us, it's working.
but
And all I
they
kind of go
spend it
is,
on what?
they spend it on saying, hey, Intel, come build this big fab plant in Licking County. And then here we are now, right? 2 years after we're supposed to already start doing fabs. It's the, hey, Peloton, come build this plant in Lake County, Ohio. And then it never opens, never builds a single bike. It's, hey, cracker plant, we're going to build an ethanol cracker plant in Belmont County. I spend $100 million, it never comes. Hey, Honda, LG Energy Solutions, let's build this AV battery plant out in Fayette County. And then Honda says, we're out of the business. And now we have this big, massive thing that isn't going to build many batteries at all. So they're picking winners and losers from an economic development standpoint, and they're not very good at
Yeah.
it. Because again, all I can go off of, sorry, what does the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers say in terms of Ohio's net job growth from beginning of its creation until today? And the answer is we've had a declining thing. The longer jobs Ohio's done its work, we've gotten weaker. If it was so good, we should have seen that, not that.
Yeah.
So that's where I just kind of go, again, Republicans, why are you not going
Yeah.
after these things that aren't working? It seems pretty clear it's not working. Look at the job numbers.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's enraging. Um, I now want to actually shift and talk about an exciting project that you have. You just published. It's you just published a book. It's
Yeah.
a novel. It's a fiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is called, what is it called?
The architect rises.
The Architect Rises, and it has a terrifying plot of you're using obviously your Homeland Security background and knowledge, and terrorists are trying to get us. They're launching terrorist attack in a variety of cities, and then you have to kind of call this super spy or super analyst or
Yeah, Cooper Stone.
Cooper Stone, and your co-author was AI.
Yeah. So really cool project from my perspective because I'm a geek, right? So
Yeah.
about a year ago, with I used Grok 3, which is Twitter's
Yeah, yeah.
or X's, whatever, and I had like a 7-day conversation on public policy, right? And I published every single conversation I had on my Substack, The Patriot Mind.
Yeah.
Okay, and after that, I thought, God, I was blown away, Vera. I mean, I looked at it after
Yeah.
I was done and said, my future's if I were Matt Mayer, want to be a public policy person at age 22, I'd be terrified because what Grok 3 could do in mere seconds, it would take me weeks and potentially months to gather all the data, analyze it, put it into
Yeah,
paragraphs
but
and
what
respond.
is important is that there's McNair on the other side of this asking the questions.
I agree. But so I just went, wow. So a great
Yeah.
conversation. So now pause, rewind. About, I don't know, 15 years ago, I came up with this plot, end-to-end plot that I designed. I started trying to write the book, and this is my 5th book now, but all the first 4 are all nonfiction. So I start writing this book. I wrote a couple chapters, and I just realized I'm not a
Yeah.
fiction guy. I love fiction, but I can't write it. I feel
Yeah.
like I can't do dialogue. He said, she said, he said, he said. Like it just doesn't
Yeah.
flow. And we use this plot, by the way, that I designed when I was over at American Enterprise Institute. They did their Sea Island, Georgia big thing with all the bigwigs. So when I was there with this plot, we had, Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Larry Page, Michael Milken, Eric Schmidt, Dick Cheney, Lindsey Graham. Well, we did this war game where each people could sign up to play a role in this war game of this plot I designed, and including, like, again, all these big name people did it and they loved it. They thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So fast forward,
What was the goal of that?
it was so to test. So the goal was to see, like, to war games of how the U.S. government should respond to this rising threat that's happening as more intel is coming in on what, Iran to Venezuela and this dirty nuke that was coming up the American highway in terms of Central America, South America, across the border, potentially, right? All this fun stuff. So then back in December, I thought, oh, I wonder if I can find a writing AI that if I plug the plot in, it could generate the book. So I plug it in under 8 minutes, it spit out a 412-page book that I had to do some light editing.
I assume
And
your
then
prompt was very elaborate, though.
I literally I cut and pasted the actual plot. So plot, start, finish, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, where I had like maybe 1 or 2 sentences, very thin, like not a lot. And at the end of this book, I have what I plugged into the AI. So you can see exactly what I put in. And so I get it, put it out, I edit it very lightly, and it's now went on live on Amazon Monday. And the idea here, and I mean, full disclosure, I tell everybody this is AI generated, right? But I'm donating 100% of proceeds to the Micro Works Foundation because, again, to close the skills gap, because this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the idea is I'm going to do the same thing in 3 years. So I'm going to input the exact same plot data into the AI again to see how much better it gets at taking my plot and turning it into a book. because it was good. It's a great story, but you'll see it deviates from my plot in a way that I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So very, very interesting little
So
experiment I'm
when you
doing.
had your plot in mind and you were thinking of writing it, did you know how it would end?
Yeah. I mean, literally it's end to end. The plot I designed was start to finish of how it ended and everything. And so it's all, but I just
But
never
does it
wrote the
end the
book.
same in the AI copy?
No, no, it deviates from my plot and came up with something totally different. It created new characters. Like it was it's
What about
crazy.
the Cooper guy? Did he have kind of the features and the smarts that you kind of
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then and then Anya Sharma
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that AI created
The
her.
cyber
Yeah, and then Ernie Gruber, who is like, there's a guy, I don't know if you remember a guy I used to work with, Corey Gruber. He was my right hand guy
yeah.
at Homeland Security. He and I did all the national preparedness goal, all the target capabilities list. We came up with all the risk based funding stuff. And so I sent him a copy of the book. He hasn't read it yet, but I just said because he became kind of my right hand guy in the book, and so that's part of how it also came out.
Yeah, that's cool. But so do you like the way it ended there better than the way you would have ended it? Or
No, no, my ending is way better, but it's still
so
pretty good. Like it's
I
still a
I
very like,
so
oh, okay.
why wouldn't you actually give him get I mean, if it takes 8 minutes, like why wouldn't you kind of spend some time writing a much more elaborate plot and
No, the
use
plot is elaborate. That's the point. Like, so if you look in the back of the book, you'll see how elaborate the plot is.
yeah, but
I'm
what I mean is like so to get him to write the book you wanted to write. That's what I mean. I just wonder like how much work you'd have to do, how much prompting, how much revising of the prompt, how much because and how much time it would take you and whether effectively like it'd be a better book. Uh,
yeah, no, yeah, fair question. And I
so
think that's what's going to be the case in 3 years, right? I think
I don't
so.
know
Remember, this was
actually.
an experiment.
I'm
I wasn't setting out to actually write the book as much as to test AI. It's seeing how good AI is at doing something that we pay people to, whether screenwriters, whether
yeah.
authors, anybody who writes for a living, how good is AI? It's saying, here's my prompt. What can I spit out? And I would say it's really good, not great because at the end of the book, I walk through the things I say are the
Yeah.
weaknesses. So, but I hold that to the end so that people
Yeah,
can
yeah.
read the book and then go, oh, right, because there are things that it does that I'm like, "Oh, I don't know why it did that, but it did." So, okay, fine. You have to deal with that.
So what you're
But
editing, you said you edited it. What did you edit it for?
so there are times so what I caught, and I'll talk about this at the end, is that so for example, it would add characters with the same names as older other characters. So
Mhm.
then you'd
Yeah,
have
yeah.
like three people with the last name Gruber or 2 people with Anya. And so there was that confusion
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
had to then kind of start adjusting a bit and making sure that, that the people with the names were the same people and then getting different names for people so it wasn't confusing.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about Homeland Security. It's kind of a two-part question I want to ask you. So you were involved in Homeland Security after 9/11, which is a very intense, time
Yeah.
in our nation's history. How scary was this? And how do you think how do you think we're prepared? And how do you assess the the change in the Republican Party, how do you think it affects actually our what needs to be done to be prepared?
Yeah, so I think if you are being honest about like our national security domestically, I think you have to conclude that we actually did a pretty good job after 9/11 creating the architecture to push our boundaries physically and electronically out. Meaning, and we made it really hard for complex plots to get here. So like the 9/11 style plot, the shoe bombing plot, we learned a lot that we've created now, and that's not a Homeland Security thing, right? That's more of a larger infrastructure,
Yeah, yeah.
but we've pushed our borders out and we've done a pretty good
Mm.
job because we've not had a spectacular big attack, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where we now have, which was predictable, where our threat comes from is this really small group, lone wolf,
Yeah.
the shooting, the using the car, knifing, that we would like, what lone wolf, so to speak, right? Those are really hard to stop.
Yeah, I made a bit
Anywhere,
as the good news about that is, I mean, the scale of the damage they can do is also smaller.
yeah, it's limited, right? Obviously, terrible for the
Mhm.
folks who are impacted, but we're not going to see. We haven't seen again the plot that is taking a plane down, taking down a building, exploding a bomb at a music festival. Like we've just not seen that stuff. So that's good, right? If they can figure out how to get around the architecture that we've set up,
Mhm.
are we prepared? No. I mean, we're not. And we're
Yeah, yeah,
not,
yeah.
right? This gets into let's use the analogy of natural disasters, right? We
Mhm.
still don't do well in natural disasters. Look at Helene and Asheville, North Carolina, right? I mean, we still don't do a good job dealing with big events. And in this case, they're mostly now still natural
Mhm.
disasters. So if they were able to get something through and we had a big event, I mean, look at the pandemic, right? Because I don't know if you remember this, Vera, but this is what's crazy for me, right? Like, I look back at my time in DC and the things I did at the time, I didn't realize, like, oh, gonna be a pretty big deal. But when we did Top Off 3, I don't know if you remember, but we
Top
did
of 3, what is that?
that's the full scale
Oh, yeah,
national
yeah, yeah.
exercise
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we did in Connecticut
Yeah,
with
yeah,
a
yeah.
mustard gas VBED, right? Vehicle borne
Mhm.
explosive device. And then we did a pandemic. We did a pneumonic plague release from a plane coming in to Newark
Mhm.
that then spread across the country, blah, blah, blah. And the point of that then was to test our prophylactic and prescription distribution system, which we did terribly.
Mhm.
But who would have, right, would I have thought, oh, 15 years later, we're going to get hit with this virus coming out of Wuhan, China on planes that we're going to watch land in places like Seattle and just like we saw when we modeled the distribution of the virus in Top Off, we saw like, persons, 50 people get off plane, they get on new planes go to these 50 different locations. People get off, go to train, go into New York City, go down to New Jersey, Philly, get on, like, right? You just saw how rapid it was. And it like literally when in January and February of 2020, as this was spreading, I just thought, holy God, we already tried to, we've gone through this. So how did the government do? Not good at all. Despite having actually tested this 15 years before. And this gets into, I don't know if you remember the Lee Clark who wrote that book,
Yeah,
Mission Improbable,
yeah.
back when we were doing our stuff. And he talked about symbolic planning. Then he said, what his thing was, the US government's really good at symbolic planning, meaning his example was the US, the US government has a plan that says if there's an oil spill, we're going to capture 20% of the oil on open water. When the the fact is we've never been able to recover more than 3 or 4%. So there's a symbolic plan that makes everybody feel good that says 20%, even though we know we can't capture more than 3 or 4%. That's what tends to happen in this world that we live in terms of terrorism. We have all these symbolic plans that say we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Then the virus hits us in 2020 and we just get flattened because we don't have hospital beds, we don't have PPE, we don't have, right, all the things that you saw us going, oh my God, China has all this stuff. We got it. That's where we manufactured from. We did nothing on the preventative side and the response side to be prepared. So the answer is we're going to be horribly prepared if we get hit with something big again, most likely.
Yeah. And you well, but I mean, isn't there isn't there a I think there is kind of a case to be made for not being absolutely prepared for absolutely everything, especially when they're
Yeah, it's
kind of like,
economically inefficient.
that there's the probability is relatively low. There's the problem is like we're not even crossing the barrier of being a little bit
Minimally.
prepared. Like,
Yeah. No,
yeah, I
no,
mean,
you're totally right.
uh,
If we think that, oh, if this happens, we're gonna need 20,000 hospital beds and all da 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 da, and you go out and build that, you're gonna have 20,000 hospital beds empty for years and years and years and years. So it's economically inefficient to do that. But there is okay, but where is there a dual use component where we could have certain things done at a minimum so that we can then ramp up and we have, contingencies in place to ramp up quickly to get what we need.
yeah.
We don't have any of that really done. And that's what's really frustrating.
I mean, I don't know if you followed the state capacity discussion among libertarians, right? So there is just like, there's this, Tyler Cowen, who's Mercatus, he's
Oh yeah, yeah,
professor at
yeah, yeah. I know.
GMU.
He had
He
that book that come out. I read a couple years ago.
he was like, I'm a state capacity libertarian, and he was just basically saying that we should favor the government being actually really invested well in the stuff that it should do. And okay, fine. I'm not an anarchist. We can have discussions over what it is really that the state should be doing and should be prepared for. I'm willing to conceive national security, homeland security is probably like, however you want to define this. The problem with I think the whole state capacity discussion is that it's not operating in a vacuum. It's the same reason why the Europeans are actually not investing in their defense is because they're making the decision to spend on all of the welfare and all of the entitlement and all the social programs and all of the rest of the junk that they're invested in, right? It is a choice that they're making. And so the fundamental problem that we have today and is to say, okay, it was fine. Okay, if you are going to if there should be a government, if there's going to be a government, there are things that it should do and it should do them well. But once you've said this, it's almost the end of the conversation. If you don't have the incentive within the system to actually prioritize really doing what the government should do, as opposed to doing all the junk it shouldn't be doing. And and so and so I don't know, I just never know how you go around because it is not sexy. It is not sexy to say, we're not going to be like we're going to not be sending you all of that money, giving you all these tax credits for this and that, and if you were parents we're going to send you big checks, and if you and if you you know and if you're a teacher you're going to be double paid on this, and if you're whatever special interest you like, we're throwing money at you, and we will never cut social security because we promise we'll never touch anything, and Medicare is going to be more generous, and we're going to make eligibility even you know bigger, and SNAP, and of course there should be no restriction on SNAP, and it doesn't matter what wealth you have. That's easier to say than actually say, you know what, I'm not doing any of that stuff, or I'm doing it actually at a really restricted level to really truly target those who are really really in need, and instead I'm doing this thing that we may never need, but we have the knowledge that and that's the difficulty. That's just
Yeah, no, so I think, that in Tyler's world, right, it's like it ignores the reality that we live in a place that has fiscal constraints, right? Resources are finite. We don't have endless amounts of money. So you can't just go, well, we should do everything. And because again, right, we can print money and then we have hyperinflation, right? Or you have to then make tough choices. And that's the problem, as you know, Vero, is government, state, federal, local, doesn't even matter. They rarely make the tough choices
yeah.
because they make the choices that they think will get them votes. And then they say, I'll leave the problem to the next generation of politicians because Social Security won't be broke till I'm gone. So let's do plan B, right?
Well, actually, it
On
will be.
Medicare.
It's 2032 benefits
No, I know.
by
So
law.
people like you, what about the promise to me? What about the promise that was made to me? I paid into the system my entire career, and I've been working since I was 12 years old. But you're going to tell me I'm not going to get what my
You paid
what?
into the system, but not for your own benefits. But
Oh, I know
I,
you.
you
I
know,
know how the system
you know.
works, right?
But I
But
mean,
again, where's the promise to me?
yeah, yeah, no,
That
no.
doesn't matter
I
as
get,
much.
I get it. And so what? I just kind of like, this is ultimately the difficulty when, if you take, you know, even I with my limited kind of acceptance of what the government should really be doing. I have a pretty narrow, I'd like to be like them to defend us rather than actually go and wage wars. But I would like the homeland to be protected against, some the big most damaging threats.
Yeah.
How do we get the rules changed to prioritize actually like the money going this way? And I don't think we can. I just
no. I mean,
the
history
incentive,
says we can't,
the
right?
political incentives are just
Well, this is what is that? It's Alexander Tytler, right? The decline of democracy, right? Because
yeah.
you vote, right. If you offer people bread and circuses, we saw this with Rome, right? Bread and circuses, and we're seeing that today, right? We are in that cycle of democracy, and whether are we in dependency or probably dependency phase is where
Yeah.
I am, right? We've expended so much, whether it's through poor programs, entitlements like SNAP or Medicaid,
Social Security,
but we've also done it through
disability.
earned income tax credits, right?
Yeah.
Like for kids. So we do it both everywhere. Even salt is the same concept, right? And so to me, the thing I think about is how do we get them to make better decisions? And I'm not sure we can,
Yeah.
because the political incentive from an electoral standpoint is to get people to vote. And how do they do that? They do that by spreading wealth and making promises that we actually can't afford because we already deficit spend every year. But the bill's going to be paid by probably our kids or grandkids. So again, someday they're going to be forced to make tough decisions. And there's some wars we should fight. Like, should we
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
in Iran? We can argue about that. I've made the argument of why are we going to war with Mexico? And not like the government, but to say, wait a minute, the cartels have been pouring drugs across our border, and over 1.1 million Americans have overdosed on fentanyl that came across that damn border. More people have died because of fentanyl than any war we've ever fought, including the Civil War, where it was 700,000. Yet we're going to go fight over in Afghanistan, Iraq, right? Syria, Iran, when on our southern border is a country that literally more people have died by what they've brought into this country than any war we've ever fought. So if we're gonna fight a war, how about we fight that one right next
Haven't we
door
been
rather
fighting
than
the
way
war
over
on
there?
drugs for like 60
But that's a
years?
that's a slogan, right? That's a marketing campaign. But like, why don't we let's take napalm into the jungles of Mexico and wipe out all the damn labs, wipe out the cartels,
Yeah.
right? Send in the Marine. If again for every
Yeah. Yeah.
if we're gonna fight a war, isn't that the one to fight? Not all these ones half a globe away. Seems to me, right? If we're gonna, I'm not saying we should fight
Yeah.
wars. If we're going to, my God, can we make a better decision on which ones we're fighting?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's these incentive problems. We really, I mean, they're thick and they're hard to get around. But I think that's the whole time we have. Unfortunately, each time you and I talk to each other, we always conclude by saying we could be talking for like 10 hours. And
Yeah.
so we have to do this again. But thanks so much
Yeah.
for
Thank you for
doing
having me.
this.
And anytime
And
let's
so,
talk. I love it.
guys, go check out Matt's work. The Substack is called.
It's called The Patriot Mind, Matt Mayer, Mayer, or you can go to opportunityohio.org. So that's either place you'll find stuff.
And the thing that
But
I like
that,
about your Substack is actually like the even the Ohio focus stuff is actually good lessons for all the other states, and it's just sound economics. And then you have actually a lot of the national stuff too. So
Yeah.
and then the book is called
The Architect Rises, again, Matt Mayer, Mayer. You can find it on Amazon now, as well as my other 4 books, which is on Homeland Security. And then my 4th book was all about the ineffectiveness of the dating apps. So that's a fun one too.
yeah. That was actually really fun one. So thank you, Matt.
Hey, thank you, Vero.